everyone. This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast. Yeah, that's right. We are coming to you live from the studios and Historical Conquest. Funny enough, this is actually my office, which is my studio. Okay, but in my office, we do a lot of different things when it comes to preparing Historical Conquest, even preparing Zogos, and this podcast. One thing that I wanted to say that this was significant is we don't have the best tech when it comes to podcasts yet. We will actually be getting more advanced as we go. So, sorry about the sound. We actually found out later on that it was a little bit low for the last few episodes. So we have fixed that for now. But for some reason, our audio keeps changing. So we will be getting better tech as we go. So I just wanted to put that apology out there. And thank you so much for sticking with us through this adventure. Okay, which is the Adventure Box Podcast, of course. Now, in the Adventure Box Podcast, this is brought to you by Historical Conquest, which is our flagship company. This is the company that started it all with physical educational games. Now, not just educational games as in the cutesy little fully bound, like full of education and little enjoyment. But no, this is like 70% fun, 30% educational, because as you like it, you're going to come back for more. And every time you come in, or every time you play one of our games, you're going to learn a little bit more. So it's not overwhelming, which makes it a lot more fun as an educational game. But let's go forward. What we're talking about today in the Adventure Box Podcast is ancient Israel. So with ancient Israel, there's something that's very significant about this. And we've talked about it the last 2 weeks, but again, it's the start of the week, or at least with this topic. And I wanted to bring this up again. We are going to be going into the Bible because it is a historical document. Yes, it is a religious text, but so is the Book of the Dead for Egypt. So are the codexes of the Maya and the Aztecs. So wherever you go around the world, you're going to find all these different texts, and they all have religious writing in it, which you'll find at the beginning of our curriculum. You'll get a list of different text that we actually use for history, but was also a religious text. So in the Bible, the Bible has a lot of things before Abraham, but Abraham is basically the start of ancient Israel, which is why we bypass most of the rest of it. But when it comes to Abraham, we can significantly say that that is historical, that there was an actual Abraham, because it's not just in religious text, not just in the Bible, it's also in the Quran. So, Bible, Quran, the Torah makes up the first 5 books of the Bible, and then such. So, those are 3 different witnesses. Some of them come from the same direction, but then we have other things that actually bring it up, such as text from Egypt, and so we're actually going to be using all of these texts to talk about the family of Abraham. Not Abraham, not Isaac. Those 2 we talked about last week and the week before. No, we're going to go into Jacob. Why is Jacob so historically necessary to understand? Jacob was just another person that came from a nomadic religion, or people, just like Abraham, just like Isaac. But Jacob had something different. Isaac was the father of Jacob, had Jacob. Jacob and Esau had 2 sons. There was a feud between them. Jacob was the one given the birthright. Jacob was also the one that had 12 sons, which then became the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is why it's historically necessary to learn about these things. Now, Jacob had a lot bigger life than that. Let me go through a little bit of his life, going through actually my notes. That's not my notes. Sorry, I must have closed that one. Okay, here are my notes. Okay, so in my notes, I'm going to tell you the life of Jacob. Now, some of it very sad, some of it happier. As with most people, especially back then, they had a lot more swings than we have today. We might have things like depression we go through, or anxiety, some hunger. These people lived out in the desert. They were nomadic people, and they might not have food for multiple days. So for all those people that say, "Oh, I'm the only one experiencing this," you're not alone. There are people around the world that experience these things, and some, it was part of their upbringing. It was part of their culture. It was part of their people. So as a nomad, you'd travel around, travel wherever you could feed your sheep or trade or anything, whatever your lifestyle was or your trade was, your business was, that's what you do. You would travel to all these different areas and sell your goods. If you're a shepherd and you were a nomad that did sheep, a lot of times you'd bring them into a market, you'd sell some of them. You'd cut off the wool, you'd sell the wool. You'd do all these different things depending on your sheep. You would also do other things. You would make crafts. You would be an artisan, all these different things. So you have Jacob. He is born, they think, about 2006 BC. So in 2006 BC, you have Jacob and you have Esau born to Rebekah, who is Isaac's wife. Now, we talked about their history. You can read a little bit more or listen to it a little bit more last Tuesday. But one thing that's very significant is this is actually the middle of the Bronze Age in Canaan. So it's a time of semi-nomadic people. The Bronze Age was basically when there was a lot more nomads. It then turns into the Neolithic era when they started settling down. Now, this is not Jacob's life. He is a nomad throughout his whole life. So Jacob receives his birthright, as we talked about, around 1950 BC. Again, this is an assumed, this is a approximate of the time. So he would have been about 56 years old to actually get the birthright from his father, whose father was going blind, and so he was actually tricked to getting his birthright. Now, Jacob, after getting his birthright, was actually told by Rebekah to get out of there because Esau was very angry that he had tricked his father out of his birthright, out of Esau's birthright. So Esau said that it should be his. Okay, so all that being said, Jacob leaves. Now this is about between 1950 and 1930 BC. Now Jacob flees to Haran. If you remember Haran, we talked about it last week, or actually the week before, with Abraham. Haran is coming out of Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia, we're going to go over this next month. Mesopotamia is a great story. You need to get to know this story about Mesopotamia. All the fighting, all the cultural advancements that happened during this time. But he leaves to Haran, which is where Abraham came from. Well, Abraham came from, I can't remember the city, but he moved to Haran and left his dad to leave with his family and Lot, his nephew, out of that area. So, fearing for Esau's wrath, he leaves and goes into, it's like modern day Turkey and Syria. Okay, so let me give you actually a map. If you are on the podcast, don't worry about it. It's just a map of the world. So you have Jordan here. You have Iraq here. This is Mesopotamia. And Syria right here. Supposedly, this would be actually up in this area. Now, Turkey, no, it says Turkey, but I believe he went up that north. So they would have been in Canaan, which is down where Israel was. Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and part of Syria. That was the Canaan area. Mesopotamia, or Haran, would have been in Iraq/Syria, up close near Turkey. Okay, so that's where they came from, and they just ran back. Jacob did. So then, after so many years, I mean, they're literally gone. Let's see. Well, okay, let's go to this. Before I go into when he came back, let's go into his marriage situation. Now, Jacob, by himself, well, with some help, with some people there with him, but he goes in and starts working for a man named Laban. Now, Laban was very shrewd. He was a very shrewd man, and he was a happy father of 2 women. Actually, no, he had probably had more, but 2 women that were significant. Now, you had Rachel, who fell in love with Jacob. Now, but she was the second oldest. She was not the oldest which would have been Leah. Now, Jacob went to Laban and said, I want to marry Rachel. How would I do this? He says, well, you want to marry Rachel, then you have to work for me for 7 years. And so a time period. You have to work for me for a time period, say 7 years, and you'll be able to marry Rachel. Marriage day comes 7 years later. He works for them for 7 years in order to marry the woman that he fell in love with. So he's still in love with her. And what happened? Well, Laban actually gave him, with a veil over her face, Leah to marry. And Jacob didn't know because there was a veil over her face until they were already married. And he goes back to the father, Laban, and says, you tricked me. That's not right. I want to marry Rachel. He's like, well, if you want to marry Rachel, I'm a very diplomatic man. Work for me for another 7 years, and you can have that. And I will even make you a better deal. So he makes him a deal. And Jacob works another 7 years, all while accumulating his own group, his own family, his own start of a, well, I'm not going to say civilization, but a group that's going to be traveling with him everywhere he goes. I don't know exactly what I would call him. But so then he works 14 years altogether. Finally, he's like, I'm done working for you. You tricked me. I now have both your daughters, or at least the 2 oldest daughters. I'm out of here, and we're leaving. He's like, no, you must stay. We must make more agreements. And at one point, Jacob's finally like, no, we're gone. We're done. We're out of here. And this is around 1915 BC. So he would have been around 90-something years old. Jacob would have been. Laban, older. Now, remember, at this time, people actually did live longer. According to all civilizations' ancient texts, people did live longer. Most of the pharaohs lived up in their 90s. What do we have right now? Most of our people live to like their 70s, maybe just getting into the 80s. But no, they lived longer back then for some reason. Maybe it was better health. Maybe it's better eating. Whew, the sugar that we take, you know what? Okay, so dropping off from history for just a really quick rant. I haven't eaten so much sweets and sugars forever. I had 3 Christmas parties to go to, and my kids had a cook-off yesterday. Now, you remember, I have 6 kids. I have 1 in college, so it means I had 5 kids. I had 1 kid that was sick that day, so I had 4 kids. So we decided to team them up. So we had 2 teams. One made something called milk and cookies cake, which is basically layers of cookies, cream, whipped cream, cookies crumbled, and then more cream, more cookies, more crumble, cookies, layers, so on and so forth. And so this was a great experience, but a lot of sugar. A great experience, but a lot of sugar. Holy cow. So I can understand why people that were eating like natural things were a lot healthier back then. Plus, nomadic people, they were always walking. They were always exercising. Their joints didn't give up as soon. They had natural minerals in their systems. They didn't have all the plastics that we have. So sorry to say, it makes complete sense that they used to live a lot longer than we do. And their bodies didn't run out, get older as fast because they were living healthier. So, putting that aside, and how poor I eat regularly, I do, well, that's part of the rant, I do actually run every day. I wake up at 4:45 every morning and go running. And I go running so that I can get a nice brisk run in, cold air, cooler if it's during the summer, but cooler air. I'm able to feel invigorated and I feel accomplished. How many people have actually accomplished a run at 4:45 in the morning? Not many. Okay, so then I come home and I do another workout with my kids later on. I might go for a run with them. Usually it's just a family walk at the end of the day. So we want to keep healthy as well. We want to live a little bit longer. We don't want to have the sicknesses and illnesses that a lot of people have because of unhealthy eating. Going back to Jacob, he lived a very long time. Okay, so let's go a little bit more into what was happening. So he leaves and he's prospering. So during this time, this is around 1900, he decides to return to Canaan. Remember, Jacob left Canaan because of Esau, who was very mad at him. But remember, this is about 50 years before, 60 years before. So at this point, he's hoping that his brother has cooled off and he can come back home and see his parents' burial sites and all those different things, and come back with his brother. So he gets there and they make amends. I'm not going to go through the whole story. That's a biblical story. I will go through just the history. So he makes amends. Now he's living in Canaan and he moves around. So he moves from Canaan to Shechem, then to Bethel. Now, during this time, when he comes back to Canaan, something happens. He has 12 sons from 2 wives. Well, 2 wives and other servants. Let's see. So basically what happened, and this is all cultural. So you might say, that's evil, that's just wrong, that you shouldn't do that. You know what? This was cultural. Back in ancient times, they had plural marriages. So I will not say anything poorly against them looking from the eyes of a historian. He had 2 wives, against plural marriage. Now, Rachel could not have a child. So Leah had their first 2 sons. Then all of a sudden, Rachel, who it's a part of pride. It's a part of distinguishing yourself as a mother and wife to give your husband children, offspring, and to give your family a legacy, like generations that will go before you. Rachel had no kids. So out of desperation, he tells the servant and Jacob to have a child. So the servant has a child. Rachel still does not. So Leah, wait a second, she's now giving her a maidservant. I'm going to do that too, because again, it's all about the pride of the wives to be able to give as many children to not just the husband, but the family, and continuing on their line. And so she gives Jacob her servant to have children with. Now, you might think it's messed up. So be it. In your mind now, you'll say it's messed up. Back then, it's the culture that they grew up in. Remember, Mesopotamia. We're going to learn about some of the interesting things, interesting cultures that they had. Egypt, we already talked about the interesting cultures they had. I mean, they had incest of marrying spouses, marrying their own siblings in order to keep a dynasty alive down the generations. Yeah, so plural marriage, 2 different women, it was not that big of a thing. Or even the servants who were made basically their wives to become having children for Jacob. Now, Rachel finally conceives. So she has Joseph. And Jacob is so happy. His wife that he praises, that this is the one he fell in love with. Leah understands this and is not happy with it, but she understands that he loves her because they loved each other for a lot longer than he loved Leah. And so now there's 1 son for Rachel and a plethora of children for the rest of them. And somewhere around between 1880 and 1900, 1900 to 1880 BC, that child is now, 17 years old? 14 years old? What do my notes say? 17 years old. And he is sold by his brothers because they're jealous and sells him into Egypt. Now, remember Egyptian history. This is the same time that the Hyksos are taking over Lower Egypt, near the larger portion of Egypt that's next to the the Mediterranean. So next to the Mediterranean, you have this lower area because, of course, water runs downhill, goes from Upper Egypt down into the Mediterranean, the lower region, which is a lot more green and lush, has a lot more agriculture and such. So the Hyksos are outsiders that start moving in, mostly from Canaan and the Levant. Now, Joseph was most likely not the first of the Canaans that came in as the Hyksos. translation in Egyptian is the invaders. Um, and so, as Joseph is being sold into Egypt, he most likely went to work for some of the Hyksos pharaohs. Yes, the pharaohs, the Hyksos, actually claimed pharaohship over the lower Egyptian area. And so Joseph worked there. And then later on, he brought his family down during a famine. And as we know, there was a lot of famines at the Nile during that time, and all of Canaan. That whole area had plentiful rain and green days, and then they had days of droughts, famines, no food, no water. And so during this time, Joseph, who is sold into Egypt, becomes vizier with the Hyksos pharaoh, or it could have been with the Egyptian pharaoh. No one's quite sure exactly who it was, but it was one of the pharaohs. And so he becomes second in command. He brings his family down. Now Jacob's family, the 12 tribes, Jacob, they all come down there. Okay, so what happened before that though? What happened just before? Well, in somewhere around 1870, no one really knows when it was, but around 1870, Rachel is going to have her second son. Everyone's ecstatic. Great thing, because the son that she had first was sold into Egypt. And according to the 12 brothers, the 10 brothers, he was actually killed. Joseph was killed by a lion and took the coat that he had, doused it with blood, and showed it to his brother, or showed it to their father. So the father thinks, my line through Rachel is dead. I will never have a line through Rachel, ever. Well, Rachel has another child. But the problem is, she dies during childbirth. And because she dies during childbirth, Benjamin is the only lasting line for her. To have her lineage continue, it was to that. Now, you have to know that this, yes, is a patriarchal society, but it's also a matriarchal society. The mothers have a very strong hold in the society, especially when it comes to the generations. That is not controlled by the patriarch. It is controlled by the matriarch. And so the death of the matriarch for that line is gone. And Benjamin is the only one to establish that line. Unbeknownst to Jacob, he actually has another son who is in Egypt. And so Jacob moves them into Egypt somewhere around the 1800s BC. Okay, now Jacob also dies around that same time after being moved into Egypt. His body will later on be carried out of Egypt, so dug up and carried out of Egypt when they leave Egypt. Now, you might question if that actually happened, but the Hyksos is 100% historical. Any archaeologist will tell you that. And they were Canaanites. So to say, oh, Joseph didn't actually exist, you can't say that. You can't say he did, because there's no actual proof of saying Joseph, oh, wait a minute. But you can actually say that the Israelites are mentioned in the Egyptian stelas. Stelas are those big monuments with inscriptions on them. And Israelite is actually part of that. Jacob is called Israel by God. And so that's where they get the name of Israelite. And later, where Israel comes from. So this is why the understanding of Jacob is so important. Because what happens to those 12 tribes? The 12 tribes are, again, where a lot of this lineage comes from. Okay, so I thought I had actually put in my notes, but it does not look like I actually have in my notes. So what happens? I'll go over it briefly. You'll learn about this later on. But they all go up into Israel and Canaan. They take over Israel area and they set up shop. They set up civilizations, but it basically breaks into two, and we'll go into this later on. You have the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. So at one point, the Assyrians come in, and what do? They attack Israel, the kingdom of Israel, take all the 10 tribes that are there, and disperse them throughout the Assyrian Empire, as far as possibly Russia, and going up into Europe and other places. They didn't go that much farther than that, but that's actually where they would have gone. Now, during this time, or before this time, you have 12 brothers that are growing substantially. Each brother has children. Those children have other children. They mix between the tribes. But when you do mix between the tribes, you go back to I think it's the patriarch on this side. You go to the husband's tribe, and you become the husband's tribe. And so there's all this interweaving of the 12 tribes. But you're talking about, by the time they get out of Egypt, potentially between 1 and 2 million people. Wow. Now, was that all the 12 tribes, or was it other people from Canaan and the Hyksos mixing in there? Probably. It probably had some of that, but we don't know exactly how it happened. If you want to know about the Hyksos, go back to our episode in Egypt, and Hyksos it's in the title. Learn about that. It's fascinating how it all happened. How a people could just migrate in and take over that area just by migrating. That's it. There was no wars. Now there became wars afterwards, after they had already established themselves. But that's it. So this is why learning of Jacob is so important, because after this point, we're going to talk about how it starts to trickle out and going all around the world. This is why you actually have Israelites or Jews, not just in Israel, but as far, actually all around the world. But during the time of, let's say, World War II, when they were being persecuted up in Europe, you had them like every country. And Israel became a epicenter for their return, for bringing them back together. But in Israel, you have African Jews, you have Middle Eastern Jews, you have Asian Jews, you have European Jews, you have Jews from every walk of life around the world. American Jews, not just North America, South America, Jews from all over the place came back to Israel. Now, not all. They're still spread out plentiful everywhere. But in Israel, you have a multicultural society based on a religion of Judaism that stems back to, again, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the 12 tribes. So I'm going to end it there. This was very important for you to understand. Next time, we're actually going to be talking about the Hebrew enslavement inside of Egypt. Now, if you're doing the curriculum, you're going to see that these are 2 different weeks. We actually broke it up just a little bit more because there's so much information. And the Hebrew enslavement in Egypt is fascinating. And we already went over it one time when we were talking about Egypt, but we're going to go more from the Hebrew side as they go in there. So stay tuned for Thursday. You're going to love this, and we're going to be talking about this. And then next week, we're going to talk about the Exodus, leaving Egypt, which is also a big thing. So thanks so much for joining us, and we will talk to you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.